The woman standing at his door had a split lip and blood on her collar, but her eyes didn't beg. They warned. "I need work," she said. "I can cook, mend, clean. I don't eat much and I don't ask questions." Samuel Garrett stared at her through 10 years of carefully constructed solitude. Behind him, his ranch house sat dark and silent as a tomb. Beyond her, the Colorado mountains stretched cold and unforgiving under gathering storm clouds. "No," he said, and started to close the door. Her hand shot out, not touching him, but firm against the wood. "Please. 1 week. That's all I'm asking." Something in her voice made him pause. Not desperation, determination. That had been 3 hours ago. Now she sat at his kitchen table like a ghost he'd accidentally invited in, and Samuel wondered what the hell he'd done. 10 years earlier, Samuel Garrett had closed his door to the world the day he'd buried his wife and unborn son. The fever had taken Margaret in 3 days flat, so fast he'd barely had time to understand she was dying before she was gone. The ranch hands had offered condolences. The neighboring families had brought food. The preacher had spoken words about God's plan. Samuel had thanked them all, then built a wall of silence around himself so thick nothing could penetrate it. He kept 4 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse and knew better than to approach the main house uninvited. He rode into Silverton once a month for supplies, speaking only what was necessary. He ran 200 head of cattle across 5,000 acres with mechanical efficiency, and at night he sat alone in the house Margaret had decorated, drinking coffee that never tasted right and reading books by lamplight until exhaustion claimed him. Woman had tried. The widow Morrison brought pies. The banker's daughter smiled too brightly at the mercantile. Even his own sister wrote letters begging him to consider remarrying. He burned the letters, refused the pies, looked through the banker's daughter like she was made of air. The land was enough. The cattle were enough. The silence was enough. Until today, when a woman with haunted eyes and blood on her collar knocked on his door, and somehow he'd said yes. Her name was Catherine Wells, or so she claimed. She'd appeared on foot, carrying nothing but a worn carpetbag, walking up the 5-mile road from town in shoes that had seen better days. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pinned severely back and a dress that had once been quality, but was now road-worn and mended. 1 week, Samuel had finally said, stepping back from the door. "You sleep in the spare room upstairs. You cook and clean. You don't touch Margaret's things. You don't ask about my business. After 7 days, you move on." She nodded once. Understood. Now she sat at his table, hands folded, waiting while he made coffee with the awkwardness of a man who hadn't shared his kitchen in a decade. The silence stretched between them like wire pulled taut. "Why do you come here?" he asked finally, setting a cup before her. "You're the furthest ranch from town. Figured you'd be the last place anyone would look." Her honesty surprised him. "Who's looking?" "My husband." She said it without inflection, the way someone might mention the weather. "Former husband, legally speaking. He doesn't see it that way." Samuel's jaw tightened. The split lip made sudden sense. He'd do that, among other things. Law won't help. Catherine's laugh was bitter as burned coffee. The law is his brother. The judge is his uncle. The sheriff owes him money. She met his eyes directly. In Durango, Jackson Wells owns everything, including, he believes, me. Samuel knew that kind of poison. Small-town power that twisted everything it touched. 1 week. He repeated, though something in his chest was already arguing with the words. 1 week, she agreed. That night, Samuel lay awake in the room he'd shared with Margaret, staring at shadows on the ceiling. Down the hall, in the spare room that hadn't held another person in 10 years, Catherine Wells was doing the same. He told himself he'd made a mistake. Come morning, he'd give her $20 in directions to Denver, where she could disappear properly. This wasn't his fight. This wasn't his problem. But when dawn broke and he went downstairs, he found her already in the kitchen, flour on her hands and biscuits in the oven. The coffee she'd made was perfect, strong and dark, the way Margaret used to make it. She looked up as he entered. "I'll earn my keep." Samuel poured himself a cup, watching her move efficiently through his kitchen like she'd always been there. Outside, snow had started falling during the night, covering the ranch in white silence. "Storm's coming," he said. "Big one, by the look of it." Catherine nodded, kneading dough with strong, capable hands. "Then I came at the right time." Neither of them mentioned that a big storm meant the roads would be impassable. That 1 week might become 2 or 3. that outside, somewhere in that gathering white, Jackson Wells was likely already searching. The storm hit with biblical fury on the second night. Samuel was in the barn checking the horses when wind slammed the door against the wall hard enough to crack wood. Snow drove sideways, turning the world into a white roar. He fought his way back to the house, ice already forming on his beard, and found Catherine at the window. "Your men?" she asked. "Bunkhouse is solid. They'll weather it." He shook snow from his coat. "This'll last 3 days, maybe 4. Roads'll be buried 6 feet deep." Something flickered across her face. Relief, he thought, followed quickly by guilt at feeling relieved. They were trapped together now, whether either of them wanted it or not. The first day passed in careful orbit. Catherine cooked while Samuel worked on tack that needed mending. They ate in near silence, the storm howling around them like a living thing. She was efficient, respectful of his space, asking nothing. But the second day, he found her in Margaret's sewing room. "I told you not to touch her things," he said, voice hard. Catherine turned, holding Margaret's embroidery hoop. "The curtain in my room is torn. I was looking for thread to mend it." She set the hoop down carefully. "I'm sorry. I should have asked." Samuel stared at the neat parlor that hadn't been entered in 10 years. Dust motes floated in the dim light. Margaret's half-finished embroidery, a mountain scene she'd been working on when she took sick, sat exactly where she'd left it. "She was talented," Catherine said quietly. "Beautiful work." She was beautiful. The words came out rougher than he intended. Everything about her. Catherine studied him with those 2 knowing eyes. "How long?" 10 years. "That's a long time to live with ghosts." Anger flared hot in his chest. "You don't know anything about it." "I know about loss," she said. "I know about building walls to survive." She moved past him toward the door. "But I also know those walls become a prison if you're not careful." She left him standing in Margaret's room, fury and something else, something uncomfortably close to shame, churning in his gut. That night, cabin fever drove them to the same room. Samuel sat reading near the fire. Catherine worked on the curtain repair, her needle flashing in the lamplight. Outside, the storm raged on. "Tell me about the ranch," she said finally. He almost refused. But the silence had grown oppressive, and her voice was calm, without prying. So he talked about the land, the cattle, the way the mountains looked at sunrise. Small things, safe things. She listened well, asking questions that showed she understood ranching. Eventually he asked, "You grow up on a farm?" "My father had horses. In Missouri, before the war." Her needle paused. "I was good with them." Jackson hated that. Said it wasn't proper for a wife to work with livestock. What else did Jackson hate? That I could read better than him. That I kept my own opinions. That I wouldn't disappear when he wanted me to. Her voice stayed level, factual. "He broke my ribs twice. Dislocated my shoulder. Said each time it was my fault for provoking him." Samuel's hands tightened on his book. "How'd you get away?" "His business took him to Denver for a week. I walked out with nothing but the clothes on my back." She resumed sewing. "I made it to Silverton before the money ran out. Heard you needed help. I didn't advertise for help. The man at the mercantile mentioned you. Said you'd been alone 10 years, and the place was starting to show it." She glanced up. "Said you were decent, even if you were half-ghost herself." Despite everything, Samuel almost smiled. Pete talks too much. He meant it kindly. The fire crackled. Wind howled. In this circle of lamplight, with the world buried in snow outside, something shifted between them. Not romance, nothing so simple. Recognition, maybe. 2 people who'd survived different hells and ended up in the same fragile shelter. On the 3rd day, Samuel went to check the bunkhouse. The hands were fine, playing cards and grousing about being cooped up. When he returned, he found Catherine at the stove, crying silently while she stirred soup. "What's wrong?" The words came out awkward. He'd forgotten how to comfort. "Nothing. Everything." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm safe here, and he's probably tearing Silverton apart looking for me. And when this storm clears he'll come here, and you'll have to choose between helping a stranger and keeping your peace." Samuel surprised himself. "I already chose." She turned to look at him. "I let you stay," he said. "That was the choice. Jackson Wells comes here. He'll find I don't scare easy. He's dangerous, Samuel. So am I." He met her eyes. "When I need to be." Something passed between them then. Understanding, trust, the beginning of something neither was ready to name. That night, the storm finally broke. Morning would bring clear skies and the need for decisions. Catherine stood at the window, watching stars emerge. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the kindness." Samuel stood beside her, their reflections ghostly in the glass. "1 week's not up yet." She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "No, I suppose it's not." Outside, the snow lay pristine and unmarked. But they both knew that by tomorrow, tracks would appear on that white canvas. The question was whose. Jackson Wells arrived on the 6th day, riding up the valley with 2 men behind him. Samuel saw them from the barn. 3 dark figures against blinding snow, moving with the confidence of men who'd never been told no. He finished bridling his horse and walked to the house with unhurried steps. Catherine was already at the window, face pale but composed. "Stay inside," Samuel said. "He'll want to see me. To verify I'm here. He'll get nothing he wants." Samuel checked the rifle above the door, then stepped onto the porch. The riders stopped 20 yards out. Jackson Wells was a big man gone to fat, with cold eyes and expensive clothes. Authority sat on him like a coat he'd bought rather than earned. "You Garrett?" Wells called. "I am. I'm looking for my wife." Catherine Wells. Dark-haired woman, 30 years old. "She's not well. Left home confused. Family's worried." Samuel's expression didn't change. "You're on my land uninvited. State your business or leave." Wells's face darkened. "I just stated it. My wife, I heard you. Answer's the same. This is private property. You're trespassing." One of Wells's men, a scarred brute with mean eyes, spat tobacco. "Maybe we should look around. Make sure she's not here needing help. Maybe you should remember," Samuel said quietly, "that Colorado law says a man can defend his property against intruders. And I'm a fair shot, even at this distance." Wells urged his horse forward 3 steps. "You're making a mistake, Garrett. I'm a man of influence in Durango. I can make life difficult. And I'm a man who's been alone 10 years and doesn't give a damn about your influence." Last warning. The moment stretched taut. Samuel saw Wells calculating, weighing his pride against the rifle and the cold certainty in Samuel's voice. Finally Wells smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll be seeing each other again. Not if you're smart." Samuel waited until they turned their horses before adding, "And Wells? Catherine filed for divorce in Denver 3 weeks ago. Legal papers signed by Judge Morrison. She's not your wife. Not anymore. You come here again. It's not about marriage, it's about harassment. I know the territorial marshal. He owes me a favor." It was a bluff. Samuel hadn't talked to the marshal in 5 years. But Wells didn't know that. His back stiffened. Without another word, he kicked his horse into motion, his men following. Samuel stood on the porch until they disappeared over the ridge. Inside, he found Catherine sitting at the table, shaking. "He'll come back." "Maybe." Samuel poured coffee with steady hands. "Maybe not. Men like that are cowards under the bluster. He expected you alone and frightened, not someone willing to stand up." He set a cup before her. "You really filed divorce papers?" "No. I didn't know I could." Samuel pulled out a chair. "Time you learn what you can do." Over the next weeks, something unexpected grew in the ranch house on the Colorado range. Catherine stayed, not as hired help, but as something undefined and right. She brought order to rooms that had been merely occupied. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then genuine. Samuel talked more, the silence losing its grip by degrees. She was good with the horses, like she'd said. The ranch hands warmed to her quiet competence. Even old Pete at the mercantile grinned when they came to town together. "Looks like the ghost finally came back to life," Pete said. Samuel didn't contradict him. One evening in April, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the ranch showing profit for the first time in years, Catherine found Samuel in Margaret's sewing room. He'd been going through things, carefully, not hiding but remembering. "I'm not trying to replace her," Catherine said from the doorway. "I know." Samuel set down Margaret's embroidery hoop. "Took me a while to understand. Loving again isn't betraying what was. It's honoring it. Margaret wouldn't want me frozen in place." Catherine stepped into the room. "What would she want?" "For me to live." He turned to face her. "Really live? Not just survive. And what do you want?" Samuel crossed to her, taking her hands. They were calloused now from work, strong and real. "I want you to stay. Not for a week. Not as help. As my partner. My wife, if you'll have a half-ghost cowboy who's forgotten how to court properly." Catherine's eyes filled. "I'm divorced. penniless, and bring nothing but trouble to your door. You brought life back to this place. You brought me back." He squeezed her hands gently. "That's everything." She kissed him then, soft and certain, a beginning rather than an ending. They married in June, with the ranch hands as witnesses and Pete beaming like he had arranged it himself. Jackson Wells had disappeared into whatever hole men like him crawl into when their power fails. The marshal had made inquiries. Wells had debts, angry business partners, and no interest in facing charges. Catherine became Catherine Garrett, and the name fit like she'd been born to it. On their wedding night, sitting on the porch under stars that matched those from that first storm, she leaned against his shoulder. "Thank you for opening your door." Samuel kissed her hair. "Thank you for knocking." Years later, when their children asked how they met, Samuel and Catherine would smile at each other. They'd tell a softened version, about a storm, about kindness, about two lonely people finding unexpected grace. But between them lived the whole truth, that healing sometimes comes disguised as interruption, that the walls we build to protect ourselves can become the prisons we die in. That love, when it returns, doesn't erase what came before. It honors it by allowing us to live fully again. The ranch prospered, the house filled with noise and warmth. And the man who'd been frozen for 10 years learned that the human heart, like the Colorado land, can survive the harshest winter and still bloom come spring. He'd let a woman near his land after a decade of solitude. It was the best decision he ever made.